Welcome to Short Movie Channel. The movie begins with a girl named Frances who works as a waitress at a restaurant. Even though her father is a very wealthy businessman, Frances is determined to succeed in life without anyone's help. After a very tiring day, she takes the subway to head home and notices that someone has left a handbag behind. She picks it up and tries to turn it into the lost and found office at the subway station, but it's closed because it's already late. So she takes the bag home. Frances decides to open the bag and look for anything that might help her identify the owner so she can return it. We also learn that she's living at her friend Erica's place because she's determined to be independent and make her own way in life, especially after losing her mother. Erica scolds her for bringing the bag home. When Frances opens it, she finds money and an ID belonging to a woman named Greta. Frances tells her friend she'll go return it the next day using the address on the ID. After that, the two of them go to the movies to unwind. While they're out, Frances explains that she hasn't spoken to her father in a long time because he's always trying to convince her to quit her job, move back in with him, and enjoy a more comfortable life. The next day, Frances goes to Greta's house to return the handbag. Greta thanks her warmly and invites her in for a cup of coffee. Frances agrees and steps inside, noticing that Greta lives alone. Out of the blue, Greta asks if Frances lives with her family. Frances doesn't like to share too much about her personal life, so she just says she lives with her friend Erica because her place is close to work. While they're talking, Frances hears banging on the wall. Greta yells at the neighbors and explains that they're doing renovations and always bothering her. Greta then starts playing the piano, and Frances notices a picture of a little girl. She asks who it is, and Greta says it's her daughter, Nicola, who lives far away. Greta explains that she chose to live alone to be independent. Frances is touched by this because it reminds her of herself and how she left her father to become self-reliant. Greta shows Frances a photo of her dog who recently passed away and says she hasn't been able to get another one since. She asks Frances for her phone number, saying that she's an older woman and might need help sometimes. Frances gives her the number and leaves. That night, while hanging out with Erica, Frances gets a call from Greta, who asks her to come with her the next day to pick out a new dog. Frances agrees and goes with her to a pet store. Greta picks a dog that looks just like her old one. As they walk together, Frances opens up about her mother's passing and how she's been struggling with grief, which made her isolate herself. Greta tries to comfort her and asks if they can be friends. Later that night, Greta looks through Frances's Facebook profile, viewing all her photos, and sends her a message asking her to meet at church, saying she wants to help her deal with her grief. Frances agrees and meets Greta at church. Afterward, Greta talks about her daughter Nicola and how successful she is, and how her moving away left her feeling lonely. Greta says she's trying to move on and live her own life too. They go back to Greta's house, and she plays the piano. Because Frances misses her mom so much, she starts getting emotionally attached to Greta and promises never to leave her. The next day, Erica asks Frances to hang out, but Frances declines, saying she already promised to have dinner with Greta. Erica becomes suspicious and warns her not to trust Greta, reminding her she's only known her for 2 days. But Frances ignores her and goes to dinner with Greta anyway. While at Greta's place, Greta asks her to grab some candles from a cabinet. Frances accidentally opens the wrong one, and is shocked to find a bunch of handbags that look exactly like the one she found on the subway. She realizes Greta's been deliberately leaving bags on the train to lure girls to her house. Even creepier, each bag has a name on it, and one of them is labeled Frances. Frances tries to act normal and hides the fact that she knows. During dinner, she pretends to feel sick and says she needs to leave. When she gets home, she tells Erica everything, who warns her again that she should have listened from the beginning. Later, at work, Frances sees that Greta has called her over 80 times and sent tons of messages. She starts to panic and calls Erica to tell her what's going on. Suddenly, her manager tells her that someone is asking for her. She goes to check, and it's Greta. Frances immediately freaks out and tells Greta to stay away from her. She confronts her about the bags and accuses her of setting up women by leaving those purses on purpose. Francis storms out. Greta later leaves a voice message on Francis's phone, admitting that yes, she did leave the bags intentionally, but only because she's desperately trying to make a friend. She says she's felt completely alone ever since her daughter left, and all the girls she tried to befriend left her eventually. When Francis stops responding to her messages, Greta sends flowers and an apology letter to her house, but Francis refuses to accept them. She doesn't trust her and feels something's off. Later on, while Francis is working, she notices Greta standing outside the restaurant watching her. She calls the police, but the officer tells her there's nothing illegal about someone standing on the sidewalk, and they can't arrest her. He advises her to ignore Greta completely because giving her attention will only make things worse. Francis grows more anxious as Greta continues to stalk her everywhere. One day, after finishing work, Francis takes the subway and finds Greta standing right in front of her. She quickly gets off the train, and luckily, the doors close just in time before Greta can follow her. Then she heads home and finds Greta waiting for her at the door. Francis gets really upset and tells her to stay away and stop stalking her. In a clearly threatening tone, Greta says she doesn't like being ignored, and in the end, Francis will pay the price for her actions. Then Greta walks away. Francis and her friend Erica go to the police station and ask the officer to file a restraining order against Greta. The officer tells them that the process could take about 4 months because these cases usually take time. The next day, Francis remembers what Greta said about her dog dying. She starts to suspect that maybe Greta actually killed the dog. Then she remembers the dog they saw together at the store 2 days ago. So she decides to follow Greta and watch her. She sees Greta leaving the house with the dog, and by chance, Francis notices some old letters in Greta's trash bin. They're from her daughter Nicola. She picks them up and finds Nicola's phone number on one of them. Francis leaves a voicemail asking to meet as soon as possible to understand the real reason Greta is luring young women. Later, she goes home and can't find Erica, so she calls to check on her. Erica tells her she's at the bar with friends and will be home in an hour. Suddenly, Francis gets a text from Greta. When she opens it, she's shocked to see a photo of Erica at the bar. Francis immediately calls Erica and tells her to get out quickly because Greta is watching her right now. Erica exits through the back door and secretly snaps a picture of Greta, sending it to Francis. Then she heads to the subway, but Greta keeps following her and sends more photos to Francis. Francis gets even more worried and tells Erica to leave the subway immediately because Greta might be planning to kidnap her. Erica leaves the subway and gets on a bus. As usual, Greta keeps sending photos to Francis. But this time, Erica sees her and gets mad. She gets off the bus to look for a taxi. On the street, she finds Greta still following her. Erica finally loses it and tries to confront her. Suddenly, a taxi pulls up in front of her, and Francis is inside. She tells Erica to get in quickly so they can leave. On the way home, Francis shows her the photos Greta sent and tells her that Greta might be a criminal, maybe even involved in trafficking women for organ sales. The next day, Francis is having breakfast when she gets a call from Nicola, Greta's daughter. This is because of the voicemail Francis had left after finding the letters. Nicola says she heard the message and wants to meet to explain everything. Later, Francis goes to meet her, only to find out it's not Nicola, but her close friend. The friend tells her that Nicola actually died by suicide 4 years ago after years of therapy. The reason was that Greta, her mother, used to torture her and would even lock her in a box for days. Francis is completely shocked and heads to work to try to forget everything about Greta. Her dad calls and tells her that Erica has told him everything and that she needs to move back in with him because he's really worried about her. Then Francis returns to work to take customers' orders, only to be shocked to see Greta sitting in the restaurant. Francis refuses to speak with her, but Greta gets angry and starts smashing things. The police arrive and arrest her. When Francis gets home, she calls the police station to find out what happened to Greta. She's shocked to learn that the police released her because she hadn't caused any physical harm to anyone. Erica notices how tense and scared Francis is. She suggests the only solution is to go apologize to Greta, act like she's mentally and emotionally overwhelmed, and tell her she needs space to think things over. That way, Greta might start looking for someone else and finally leave her alone. So, Frances goes to meet Greta at a church and apologizes for ignoring her recently, saying that she's been grieving her mother's death and just hasn't been in the right mental space. She tells her she's traveling tomorrow to clear her head and think things through, but promises to get back in touch later. Greta believes her and says she forgives her, as long as she really plans to return. After that, Frances goes back home and has her coffee, feeling victorious because she finally believes she's going to escape Greta and return to live peacefully with her dad. But suddenly, she starts to feel dizzy and collapses to the ground. Greta enters the house, kidnaps her, and we discover that Greta had planned all of this from the beginning. She had broken into the house while Frances was away and drugged her coffee. Then she takes Frances back to her house and locks her inside a box hidden in a secret room behind the piano. She takes Frances' phone and unlocks it using her fingerprint so she can't contact anyone. When Frances wakes up and finds herself trapped in the box, she starts screaming as loud as she can. She's terrified and can't believe what's happening. Of course, Frances tries to open the box in any way she can, but it's useless. By chance, she finds an ID card of a girl and realizes that the banging sound she heard the first time she visited Greta's house was actually a cry for help from that same girl, begging anyone to save her. Meanwhile, Greta starts thinking of a plan to stop anyone from looking for Frances. She takes a photo of Frances' dad from her phone and sends it to Erica, Frances' friend, to make it seem like Frances is safe with her dad. Then she sends another photo of Frances with her dad to reassure Erica that Frances is home safe. A week passes, and Frances' dad goes to Erica's place to check on her since he hasn't heard from her in a while. That's when they both realize that Frances is missing. Her dad hires a private investigator to find her as quickly as possible. The investigator looks into it and finds Greta's file. He tells the father that Greta used to be a nurse at a hospital but was fired for abusing drugs. Meanwhile, Greta decides to let Frances out of the room and has her help prepare food in the kitchen. She feels confident doing this because she's been drugging Frances for a long time and thinks she won't be able to fight back. But against all odds, Frances hits Greta on the head and knocks her out. She tries to escape, but unfortunately, all the doors and windows are locked. She heads down to the basement to look for an exit. When she can't find a door, she keeps exploring the place. Suddenly, she sees the dead body of a girl tied up and lying on the ground. That's when Greta shows up again, covers her eyes with a cloth, and knocks her out once more, locking her back in the same room. A little while later, Greta leaves the house. The private investigator, hired by Frances' dad, arrives and starts checking the place. Greta sees him on the rooftop and asks what he's doing there. After thinking for a moment, he tells her that Frances' father is looking for his missing daughter. Greta invites him in for some coffee. While they're inside, Frances wakes up from the drugs and realizes she's tied to the bed. She hears the investigator's voice in the house and starts shaking the bed and making noise to get his attention. Greta quickly turns up the radio so he won't hear Frances. She then tells him she's going to feed her dog. It's obvious she's up to something. The investigator notices the piano is shaking and hears screaming. He pushes the piano aside and finds a secret door behind it. Just as he's about to enter and rescue Frances, Greta stabs him in the neck with a drug syringe, and he collapses. He tries to pull his gun and shoot, but he passes out before he can fire. Greta takes his gun and kills him, then dumps his body in the basement. The next day, Greta repeats her usual kidnapping method. She heads to the subway and leaves her bag out in plain sight, hoping to lure in a new victim. Sure enough, a girl finds Greta's bag and brings it back to her house. As usual, Greta invites her inside and puts drugs in the coffee. Meanwhile, Frances hears someone in the house and starts trying to shake the bed and make noise to get help. Greta, of course, turns on the music to cover the sound. But this time, the girl who found the bag switches the coffee cup with Greta's. When Greta drinks the coffee, she starts to feel dizzy and collapses. And then, surprise, the girl turns out to be Erica, Frances' best friend. She disguised herself and planned the whole thing to save her friend. Erica starts searching the house and hears banging behind the piano. She quickly moves it, opens the door, and unties Francis from the bed. Suddenly, they hear a loud bang on the piano. Greta, who had disappeared, is now standing behind them. She tries to choke Francis, but she's still weak from the drugs and passes out. Francis and Erica carry her and lock her inside the same box Greta used to trap other girls. They seal the box, trapping Greta just as she had done to others. Then, they decide to leave the house without calling the police. And that's how the movie ends. If you like the movie, give us a thumbs up and share your thoughts in the comments. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel.